Alejandro Romano, 38, CEO of a €2 billion empire, sits alone on a bench with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He has just lost everything: his wife in a devastating divorce, custody of his daughter, and now he risks losing his company too, due to a financial scandal. As he contemplates whether life is still worth living, a 7-year-old girl in a worn-out dress approaches and says, "You look sad, mister. Do you want to meet my mom?" What Alejandro doesn't know is that this girl and her mother hide a secret that will forever change his destiny. Because sometimes angels arrive when you least expect them, dressed in the humblest clothes. Madrid, Retiro Park. Autumn had painted the trees in warm colors that contrasted with the gray Madrid sky, and leaves fell slowly like golden tears onto the path where Alejandro Romano wandered aimlessly. At 38, he was considered one of the most powerful men in Spain. CEO of Romano Industries, an economic empire that generated €2 billion a year. But at that moment, sitting on a bench worn by time, he seemed like just a broken man. His chestnut hair, always perfectly combed in financial magazine photos, was now disheveled by the cold wind. The Euro's 5,000 suit that once made him feel invincible now felt like a costume that no longer belonged to him. His hands, accustomed to signing €1 million contracts, trembled slightly as he held a phone that wouldn't stop ringing with calls he didn't want to answer. 3 months ago, his life was perfect, at least on the surface. Married to Elena, a beautiful woman he met in college, father to Sophia, a 9-year-old girl who was the light of his eyes, owner of a company that grew every year. Then it all collapsed like a house of cards. Elena had filed for divorce, taking Sophia and half his assets. The newspapers had begun digging into his private life. And now a financial scandal threatened to destroy everything he had built in 15 years of work. Alejandro watched the water of the park's pond, still as a mirror reflecting his tired face. He thought about how fragile success was, how a single moment of distraction was enough to lose everything. He had always believed that money and power were the answer to any problem. But now he realized he was more alone than when he was a young graduate without €1 in his pocket. In that moment of despair, as he wondered if it was still worth fighting, he heard a crystal clear little voice beside him. A girl of about 7, with long chestnut hair framing an angelic face, was watching him with large, curious eyes. She wore a little beige dress that had seen better days. She was a bit warm but clean, and in her hand she held a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked in the park. The girl looked at him for a few seconds with that instinctive wisdom only children possess. Then she approached fearlessly and said in a sweet voice, "You look sad, mister. Your eyes hurt like when I cry." Alejandro looked up, surprised. He was used to being recognized, feared, respected, but no one had ever asked him such a direct and innocent question. The girl continued, "My mom says that when we're sad, we should talk to someone. Do you want to meet my mom? She always knows what to say to make people feel better." For the first time in months, Alejandro felt something melt in his chest. There was something pure about this girl, something that reminded him of Sophia and the innocence he had lost. He smiled weakly and asked her name. "I'm Emma," the girl replied with a radiant smile. "And that's my mom," she said, pointing to a blonde woman approaching with a bouquet of fresh flowers in her arms. And the woman approaching was beautiful, but with a beauty different from Elena's. While his wife was elegant and sophisticated like a haute couture model, this woman had something natural and luminous that made her magnetic. She wore a camel-colored coat that had seen better seasons, a flowered skirt that danced in the wind, and she walked with that simple grace of someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. When she reached the bench, the woman smiled at Alejandro with genuine warmth and said, "Excuse me, I hope Emma isn't bothering you. She has a habit of making friends with everyone." Alejandro stood up instinctively, a gesture of politeness he'd been taught since childhood. "Not at all, on the contrary. Your daughter is very sweet. I'm Alejandro." "Nice to meet you. I'm Lucia," the woman replied. "Emma, you've made a new friend," Lucia said. Emma responded enthusiastically. "Mr. Andro looked sad, Mom. I told him you always know how to make people feel better, Helena." Lucia blushed slightly and looked at Alejandro with eyes that seemed to read directly into his soul. "Emma always exaggerates, But if you'd like to sit with us, we're having a snack. I brought homemade sandwiches. Alejandro hesitated for a moment. He was used to business lunches at Michelin-starred restaurants, to gala dinners in luxury hotels. But there was something irresistible about the idea of sharing a simple sandwich with these two strangers who had welcomed him. He sat back down on the bench as Lucia pulled a steaming thermos and some sandwiches wrapped in wax paper from a cloth bag. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and fresh bread filled the air, and Alejandro realized he couldn't remember the last time he had eaten something not prepared by a famous chef. What do you do for a living? Lucia asked as she poured coffee into colorful ceramic mugs. Alejandro hesitated. Has. If he told the truth, everything would change. She would start treating him differently, with that deference mixed with calculation he had learned to recognize in people's eyes. Instead, he simply said, I work in business. And you? Lucia smiled and pointed to the flowers she had placed by the bench. I'm a florist. I have a little shop nearby on Cal Huertas. It's not much, but it allows me to raise Emma and do what I love. Emma, who had finished her sandwich, got up to chase a pigeon pecking at the crumbs. Alejandro watched her play and felt a pang in his heart thinking of Sophia, who now lived with Elena and whom he only saw on the court-ordered weekends. Do you have children? Lucia asked, noticing his expression. A daughter, Smear's expression. Sophia is 9, but Alejandro stopped, not knowing how to explain his situation without sounding like a failed father. Lucia didn't press, but placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Children have the capacity to forgive much more than adults. Don't lose heart. In that moment, Alejandro understood this woman had something special. It wasn't just her beauty or kindness, but the way she managed to see beyond appearances, to touch people's souls with a disarming simplicity. In the following days, Alejandro began returning to the park every afternoon, first to run into Lucia and Emma by chance, then openly because he had found in them the peace he had been seeking for months. Lucia didn't ask questions about his life. She didn't ask why a man in an expensive suit spent his days sitting on a bench, and that respectful silence was more precious than any declaration of love. Emma had become his little confidante. She told him about her days at school, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian to help animals, the books she read with Mom before bed. Alejandro discovered that listening to a girl talk about her everyday problems was more relaxing than any therapy session. One afternoon, while Emma played with other children near the fountain, Lucia and Alejandro were left alone on the bench. She had brought him a hot herbal tea and homemade cookies, and they were silently watching the sun set behind the park trees. May I ask you something? Lucia said suddenly. Alejandro nodded, mentally preparing to reveal his true identity. Why do you come here every day? Don't get me wrong, we enjoy your company, but I have the impression you're running from something. Alejandro sighed deeply. From myself, actually. From the life I thought I wanted that now seems like a nightmare. Lucia looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to understand everything without judging anything. You know, I went through a dark period too. When Emma was 3, her dad left us. He said he wasn't ready for the responsibilities, that he needed to find himself. For months, I thought it was my fault that I hadn't been a good wife. Alejandro looked at her surprised. Lucia seemed so strong, so sure of herself, it was hard to imagine her vulnerable. What helped you get through it? He asked. Emma, Luce replied, smiling. When you have a little girl depending on you, you can't afford to stay down. You have to get up, dust yourself off, and move forward. And then I understood that sometimes people come into our lives at just the right moment, when we need them most. At that moment, Emma ran to them with a flower she had picked. Mom, look, it's for Mr. Alejandro because he looked sad. Alejandro took the little yellow flower and felt his eyes fill with tears. It was a simple dandelion, what people call a weed, but for him it was the most precious gift he had ever received. Do you like this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. Thank you, Emma. It's beautiful. Flowers make everything prettier, the girl said wisely. Mom taught me that. Alejandro looked at Lucia and understood that this woman and her daughter had come into his life for a reason. He didn't believe in fate, but he was beginning to believe that sometimes the universe sends angels when you need them most. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Alejandro had found the courage to tell Lucia the truth about his identity. They were sitting at the table in the small apartment above Lucia's flower shop, while Emma slept in her little room. The apartment was small but cozy, full of fresh flowers and that warmth only a home where one is loved can have. Lucia had prepared a simple but delicious dinner: homemade paella, mixed salad, and a bottle of house wine. Alejandro, accustomed to Michelin-starred restaurants, couldn't remember the last time he had enjoyed a meal so much. "I must confess something," Alejandro said as they drank coffee. Somebody drank coffee. "I'm not exactly what you think." Lucia looked at him with an understanding smile. "I know. How do you know?" "Alejandro, I recognized your name from the first day. Romano Industries has been in all the newspapers these past weeks." Alejandro felt his stomach clench. "And why didn't you say anything?" "Because the man I met in the park, the one who plays with Emma and gets emotional over a dandelion, has nothing to do with what the newspapers write. I wanted to know the real Alejandro, not the CEO." Alejandro looked at her incredulously. "Mm-hmm. Aren't you afraid of getting involved in my problems? That your reputation will be ruined?" Lucia stood up and walked to the window overlooking the building's inner courtyard. "You know what I think? I think you're a good man who lost his way. And I think Emma and I can help you find it again." "But the papers say I've stolen, that I've swindled investors. The papers say many things. What matters is what the heart says. And my heart tells me you're not the type of person who would hurt others for money." In that moment, Alejandro felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. This woman not only believed in him, but was willing to stand by him despite everything. "Lucia," he said, standing up and taking her hands, "I believe I've fallen in love with you." Lucia smiled and looked into his eyes. "I have too, but we must go slowly. I have to think of Emma, and you still have many battles to fight." "I know, but I want to fight them with you by my side, if you'll let me." In that small, sunlit kitchen, as Madrid slept outside the window, Alejandro understood he had found what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. Supported by Lucia's love and Emma's unconditional trust, he found the strength to fight the accusations that were destroying him. He hired the best lawyers, opened his company's accounting books to investigators, and, above all, began investigating who could have framed him. Lucia became his anchor of salvation. Every night, after exhausting days in court and lawyers' offices, Alejandro went to have dinner with her. Emma always greeted him with a hug and a drawing she had made at school. And Lucia listened to him talk about his problems while she prepared calming herbal teas and massaged his tense shoulders. "How do you manage to be so strong?" he asked her one night after a particularly difficult day where the newspapers had published new accusations against him. "Because I believe in you," Lucia replied simply. "And because Emma needs to see that in life, you must always fight for what you believe in." It was actually Emma who gave Alejandro the clue that changed everything. One night, while watching the news after dinner, the girl saw a photo of Roberto Martin, the deputy director of Romano Industries, and said, "Mom, that's the man who came to the shop last week. The one who asked you weird questions about Alejandro." Alejandro and Lucia looked at each other. Roberto was his right-hand man, the one who had managed many of the company's financial operations in recent years. But what was he doing at Lucia's flower shop? What kind of questions did he ask? Alejandro asked they. "He wanted to know how long we'd known each other, if you were really in love with me, if I thought you'd give up the company for me. It seems strange, but I thought he was a worried friend of yours." Alejandro felt the blood freeze in his veins. Roberto was sabotaging him from within and was trying to use Lucia to hit him even harder. The next day, Alejandro confronted Roberto in his office. "Why have you done this?" Roberto, cornered, confessed everything. He had orchestrated the financial scandal to force Alejandro to sell the company below its value, allowing him to buy it through ghost investors. "You've always been too honest, Alejandro. Too naive. This company needs someone willing to get their hands dirty. And that's why you tried to destroy my family." "Your family?" Roberto laughed bitterly. "A florist and a little girl. I thought you were smarter." Alejandro didn't respond. He knew Roberto would never understand that this florist and this little girl had given him more than his entire economic empire had ever achieved. 6 months later, Alejandro was sitting on the same bench in Retiro Park where it had all begun, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him was Lucia, beautiful in a simple yet elegant white dress, with a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. Emma, in a little pink dress Alejandro had bought her for the occasion, skipped ahead of them, scattering rose petals she had picked from her mom's shop. The scandal had been resolved. Roberto had been arrested, and Alejandro had reclaimed his reputation and his company. But most importantly, he had reclaimed himself. He had also obtained shared custody of Sophia, who now spent weekends with him. Lucia and Emma and the two girls had become the best of friends in the world. Are you sure about this? Alejandro asked Lucia, taking her hand. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she replied, smiling. And if the newspapers write that you've married a florist, then they'll write the truth, that you've married the luckiest woman in the world. Alejandro laughed and kissed her as Emma clapped and shouted, Hooray! Now we have an even bigger family. That night, at the villa Alejandro had bought on the outskirts of Madrid, they celebrated their wedding with a simple party full of love. Present were the employees from Lucia's flower shop, some true friends of Alejandro's who had stood by him during the crisis, Sophia, who was finally smiling again, and Emma, who ran through the garden in a dress covered in flowers. You know what I think? Lucia said to Alejandro as they danced under the stars. What? I think sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what truly matters. Alejandro looked into her eyes, those green eyes that had seen in him the man he wanted to be, not the one he thought he should be. You're right. And I think the best day of my life was when a 7-year-old girl asked me if I wanted to meet her mother. Emma, who had heard them, ran over and threw herself into their arms. And I think now we're the happiest family in the world. Alejandro looked at his wife and his daughters, the garden full of flowers Lucia had planted, the house that was now truly a home, and he understood that Emma was right. Sometimes angels arrive when you least expect them, dressed in the humblest clothes, and they teach you that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the smiles of the people you love. Life had taken everything from him to give him what truly mattered, a family built on true love, the kind that can't be bought or sold, but is cultivated every day like the flowers in Lucia's garden. This story has made you believe in the power of pure love and the importance of never losing hope. If you also believe that true wealth is found in authentic relationships, that children teach us life's deepest lessons, and that love can truly save a lost soul, put a like and share this video. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever met someone who changed your life in a moment of difficulty? Do you believe true love can overcome any obstacle? Do you know stories of people who found happiness when all seemed lost? Share your experiences and help us spread this message of hope. Because every story of true love reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light that can guide us home. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the triumph of the heart over despair. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for stories that prove the purest love is born from the simplest gestures.